Hello, and welcome to, well, the last day of my 2017 GTI. You may have seen this car in an episode of Cars and Fuel, but I thought, instead of just dropping it off at the dealer where I'm selling it, I thought I'd kind of go over, one, my ownership experience and kind of the things I've learned owning this car. I bought this car in order to learn. I wanted to not just learn what it's like to have a second car, but also to, really get a taste of European ownership. I previously had that owning a Saab, and, I decided to give it a fair chance and buy a fairly newer German vehicle, although Volkswagens have a certain reputation for reliability. So let's start off with a little bit of background. I initially started playing with the idea of getting a second car in 2021. At that time, I guess my intention was to kind of experience more cars. I love my BRZ. I had been driving it for about 3 years. I've been dailing it for about 3 years, so I'd driven it in every possible scenario, carrying things in the back. I carried a guitar pretty often at one point. I put people in the back seat pretty often. I even drove it in the snow as well, so I really put that car through its paces, and I absolutely love that car. I don't see myself selling that anytime soon if I can help it. I always say that I hope to be able to teach my children how to drive stick in that car, so I hope it will be with me for that entire time. Now, with that said, as someone that's into cars and, especially as a journalist, I want to be able to experience as many cars as possible, not just test them, when we get the cars for review from manufacturers for a week, because you can only learn so much about a car during that time. I wanted to live with the car, and more importantly, I wanted to get cars that I always really wanted to have. And so the first car that I picked up in 2021 was a 2005 Saab 92X Aero. And although it says Saab, it was technically a Subaru WRX Wagon. It was a joint project between Saab and Subaru, but anyways, I had always wanted to own a WRX Wagon when I was younger, and so I thought, what better time than present, and so I ended up picking one up, and because it's a Saab and not a Subaru, it ended up being a little bit less expensive than if it was an actual WRX. Now, the 92X Aero was awesome. I mean, it was essentially a WRX wagon, like I said, but it had several upgrades. In the earlier years, I guess, it had a slightly faster steering rack, although there's some debate about whether that's actually true in the Saab community, so I'll leave it up to you guys to decide. But, it was essentially a WRX, but with more refinement than a standard WRX. It had more sound deadening, and it had different headrests, I think, for better safety performance. Overall, it was like owning a WRX, all the joys of owning a WRX, but with a lot more refinement and just overall more comfortable of a car, and I thought that was really neat, to be honest with you. I really liked the one that I picked up, and the big problem with it was that it was an automatic, and I kept thinking that I'd be okay with it, but the thing is, I think I might be okay with owning a modern automatic. I don't think that a 4-speed auto from the early 2000s from Subaru is quite the same as owning a modern automatic. I mean, that thing was very slow to shift. I mean, the gears were really widely spaced apart. It also had really poor fuel economy, that car. Now, I don't know if that's because there's something wrong with the engine tuning, or maybe the automatic is just that bad at fuel economy. I don't know. I was averaging about 16 to 18 miles per gallon in that car, driving fairly conservatively. So the automatic really held me back, and mechanically the car was pretty okay. I mean, the main problem I had with that car was most of the tires shredded itself when I was driving on the freeway, and I ended up having to replace all 4 tires, so that was kind of a bummer. But mechanically, it didn't seem to give me any issues. Since I had the 2005, it had the 2-liter engine, which was known to be significantly more reliable than the 2.5s that came later on. So I ended up selling that car, which was a bit of a bummer, and then I ended up getting a '05 Outback XT wagon with the manual, which is almost what I always wanted. I actually always wanted the Legacy GT, which was a little bit lower. The Outback, of course, was raised up. But I found a fairly clean one, or at least what I thought was a fairly clean one. I took it in for service, and it turns out there were quite a few oil leaks going on with the car, And, of course, that's typical with Subarus, but it was just a bummer because I couldn't really see it when I was initially inspecting the vehicle. But after a lot of thinking and after tallying up all the different repairs that would have to be done on the car in the new future, I just decided it was better to kind of cut my losses and just sell the car as is, which is what I ended up doing towards the end of 2021. Start 2022, I got a little bit antsy and decided to take a look at another car, and I wanted a wagon again, and I stumbled upon a 2002 Saab 9.5 Aero wagon, and this car wasn't even on my radar at the time, but you know, I've always wanted to experience what it's like to own a Saab. I found the history of Saab just incredibly interesting. The way they design cars is incredibly interesting. This one was incredibly clean. You know, being a wagon version of the Aero, it was incredibly rare. So I decided to pick it up. I wanted to see what it was like owning a European car, especially a European car that, you know, the company didn't exist anymore. So I went through that whole experience, and you know, it's the same reason I sold the previous cars, which was the maintenance just kept stacking up. You know, the fact of the matter was, as clean as it was a 20-year-old car, and 20-year-old cars generally need things. It doesn't matter if it's a European car or if it's something like a Lexus or Toyota. 20-year-old cars generally need things. The pricing of those things and how often it needs things is obviously different, but 20 years of wear is 20 years of wear, and this Saab had very low miles, but it was still a 2-decade-old car. So I ended up selling that car in Cars and Bids, and we actually ended up making a video about that car before I sold it. As part of the auction process, I wanted to kind of provide an in-depth tour of the car to make people a little bit more comfortable with bidding on that vehicle at the time. And at that point, I kind of had a more solid direction of what I wanted from a second car. I wanted a dependable daily driver, something that's fuel efficient, something that's modern, that's going to have modern creature comforts such as Apple CarPlay, which is something that's really important to me. A car that would allow me to kind of put the BRZ away during the week and avoid all the, you know, the struggles and the heartbreak from regular Seattle traffic, which is, you know, people driving a little bit too close to me, people flinging rocks at me, people deciding to lean on my car and denting it, things like that. All things that kind of have really stressed me out when driving my BRZ. Now, to you, it might not be, you know, an expensive, flashy car, so maybe you're wondering why it's such a big deal to me. But I really enjoy the car, and I really want to try to preserve it in as best condition as possible to kind of keep it for, honestly, as long as I possibly can. Like I said, till I have children and I can teach them how to drive. I wanted a second car that would make a great daily, and I had initially driven the Golf R, and I didn't like how that felt. And so when I was looking into buying GTIs, I didn't have high expectations, but I drove a GTI with a performance pack, and I was just absolutely astounded by how much better it handled. Partially due to the fact that it has an LSD, which a Golf R doesn't, which really helps with that initial turn-in, especially under partial throttle. And also because it's several hundred pounds lighter than a Golf R. I was really excited, and I was really determined that after I sold the Saab, I would use that as a down payment to the GTI, a newer vehicle, and also get a warranty as well, so that I can get the experience of, you know, having a newer car. Instead of spending a certain amount of money on a used car and owning it outright, I thought I would use that money as a down payment to get a newer vehicle that will hopefully have less maintenance issues. And if it does, well, maybe I wouldn't have to pay out of pocket for it. If you watched our Cars and Feel episode, you might have heard me explain the story of how I got this specific GTI, which is technically the second GTI that I bought. The first one I owned for about 8 days. Instead of going over that story, I thought I'd focus more on owning this GTI, the second one that I bought. And the story goes like this, which I didn't explain in that podcast episode. I found this car, and after I signed papers for it, before I even took delivery of the car, I wanted to make sure that they did the alignment on the vehicle, which is a very common issue on this car. They tend to fall out of alignment pretty quickly, and from my understanding, that is because the front control arm bushings are very soft and pliable, and they're actually designed for the base Golf. And so in the GTI with a little bit more power, it tends to kind of pull and misalign the suspension geometry, and I'm told that that soft bushing that's designed for the base Golf is not just in the GTI, but it's also in Golf R, S3, and RS3, a car that's significantly more power than a base Golf, and significantly more power than this. So I actually had those bushings upgraded. But anyways, before I took delivery of this vehicle, I had the dealership do an alignment as part of the deal. And when they did the alignment, the technician noted that the clutch was wearing out, which, even though the car only had about 44,000 miles at the time, is not uncommon on GTIs, unfortunately. Spoke to a friend of mine that has a Mark 7.5, and he said that, yeah, GTIs tend to wear out the stock clutch with stock power from about 45 to 60,000 miles, which is a real bummer. So right off the bat, before I even took delivery of the car was in the shop for about 2 weeks while they waited to get the clutch installed. And thankfully, the dealership was nice enough to split the cost of the clutch with me. I think, you know, parts and labor, what they would be charging normally would be about $3,000, $3,300. They only charged me about $1,500, which was nice, but also a bummer for a car I literally just bought. So right off the bat, $1,500 in, okay? And after I took delivery of the vehicle, I immediately noticed some things. One, the car seemed to have some weird harmonic issues while driving on the freeway, specifically at 60 62 to 64 miles an hour, and then also at 42 to 44 miles an hour or so, it would make an actual harmonic noise. And what I mean by harmonic was it was an actual note, like melodically it was a note. I could hum it. It was kind of like that. It was really weird. It kind of sounded like you were driving on the ridge areas on a highway, you know, the ones that are supposed to wake you up and vibrate. It had this perfect note at certain frequencies. You know, I took it in, and it turns out that one of the wheel bearings were worn out. And I also had this weird clunking noise at low speed when I was turning the steering wheel. It would just go clunk when I turned hard left. Turns out the driver's side strut bearing was also worn out. So I took it back to the home dealership to do the work because I was actually having some warranty issues where they basically, my warranty wasn't fully activated yet, and so it wasn't recognized at other dealerships. And so I took it to the home dealership that I bought the car from, just so that they can like have access to all the information that they need in terms of the warranty information. And when, you know, they're going through that process, and that process, by the way, took about a week, if not longer, because they kept waiting for parts. And then worse still, I was on my way to pick up the car when it was finally finished, and they were reassembling the driver's side strut bearing, and they noticed that the driver's side wheel bearing was also worn out, so they got that replaced as well. So during that time, they replaced both wheel bearings. They replaced the driver's side strut bearing, and out of pocket, because it wasn't covered by any type of service contract or warranty that I had, I paid for the ambient lighting. In conclusion, the very first visit I did, it was about $1,600 to replace the front wheel bearings, the strut bearing, and out of pocket, I paid about $400 for the ambient lighting. They were nice enough to cover the deductible for the other items. Shortly after, I had some more issues. A shifter was having issues going from 5th to 6th. It kind of felt like there was a notch in it where instead of going from 5th to 6th down, I would have to kind of move it to the left a little bit to get in. That turned out to be a shifter alignment issue, which was a real bummer. That was fine for a while, and more recently, I had an issue where the car went into a Limp-like mode, where the throttle was stuck in at 1500 RPM, and I couldn't really drive the car until I turned it off and back on again. About a month ago, I had a couple things done to the car, which was I also got the O2 sensor replaced because it's intermittently flashing a fault in OBD2. I got the valve cover replaced because it was seeping oil very slowly. And I also had the thermostat replaced under Volkswagen's extended warranty program for the thermostat and the water pump, because these are known issues. All in all, since the time that I've owned the vehicle, which is about 5 months ago, the car has had roughly $5,000 to $6,000 worth of work done. Now, I didn't pay for all of that out of pocket, thankfully. But in terms of the value of the work done, $5,000 to $6,000. This doesn't include the $800 worth of mods that I did. Actually, even more than that, because I spent $800 on the control arc bushings. I spent about $1,000 tinting the car properly. I actually had to get the old tint removed because I couldn't see out the back because it was blurry. There was that. And also taxes on the vehicle, right? Those are taxes I'm lost. But in terms of actual maintenance on the car, to make the car, you know, function, about $6,000. That's a lot of money in about 6 months worth of time. Now, one could argue that, well, all of these things the dealership should have actually taken care of before purchasing the vehicle. And that's totally fair, you know, and that's the challenge with buying a used car. You just don't know what type of standard the seller is, you know, taking the vehicle to before selling it, which is fair enough. But the other thing that I really thought about that really made me want to sell the vehicle is just the timing of everything. I bought it as a 2017 car in 2022, so it was a 5-year-old vehicle when I bought it. It is, you know, it is now on its 6th year of existence in the world, if you want to think about it that way. And it had 44,000 miles on it, and I have almost 49,000 miles on it. And a car that has less than 50,000 miles and is less than 7 years old really shouldn't be having all these bearings replaced on it, right? Which seems minor, but it kind of sets a precedent for everything else, right? At less than 50,000 miles, the car already needed the engine to be resealed. And it wasn't like it was gushing out oil, but it was starting to leak, which is a little bit unusual. It needed new bearings. The fact that I needed a new clutch already. I mean, I've owned Japanese vehicles. I've owned performance Japanese vehicles that were on original clutches and not slipping well past 100,000 miles, past 150,000 miles. It's one thing to have all your costs of repair covered under an extended vehicle warranty or under a vehicle service contract, which for me, by the way, the process is kind of tricky because the dealership that I bought it from has a lifetime drivetrain warranty that can only be honored at their dealership. unless you live more than 40 miles away, which I don't. So anything mechanical in terms of engine and transmission, I had to take it back to the home dealership in order for them to honor that warranty. And the extended service contract that I bought covers everything else. And that can be done at a dealership that's not the home dealership. But like I said, certain tasks such as the valve cover, gasket being resealed, that had to be done taking it back to the original dealership network, I should say. So just as a side note, not all extended warranties operate the same way. This is why I always recommend having a CarMax extended service contract, because it just is so much easier to work with. Once again, you know, having $6,000 worth of work done to the car in less than 6 months doesn't feel great, and they were on items that really shouldn't have failed. You know, an ambient light bar shouldn't fail in 7 years. It's an LED in there. It should last pretty much the lifetime of this vehicle as far as I'm concerned. Some might say, well, it's not a big deal if you have most of the cost covered, right? Well, yeah, but I still have to pay deductible. More importantly, it's time. It's time that I have to drop off the vehicle. It's time that I have to wait for the vehicle, because sometimes parts aren't readily available, and then I have to now wait until, you know, the parts arrive and then they can install it. And there's also labor shortages right now, meaning that, you know, dealerships just aren't operating as efficiently as they used to, especially pre-pandemic. With all of that, it just didn't feel worth it to me to have a second car anymore, especially one that I had to spend so much effort on in terms of upkeep. Pretty much for the past several months that I've owned the car, I've had to bring it into the shop to fix one thing or another for any certain amount of time, probably at least once a month. And as a daily, it's just such a bummer. So that's the reason I'm selling it. I want to stress, it hasn't been an easy decision to come to sell the vehicle, because at the core of it, I really like this car. I love how well it drives for a front-wheel drive car. I think it's very playful. I don't think it's as sharp as my BRZ, but it's not the point of it. I love the power of it. It's obviously not the quickest thing in the world, but it's enough to pass just about everything you need to on the freeway to really give you that confidence to be able to overtake, to be able to fit into gaps, things like that. I love the size of the car. I don't think enough companies make this class of car this small. They just keep getting bigger and bigger, so I love how easy it is to park. I love the comfort of the car. It's incredibly refined. It's incredibly quiet. It's just such a great package. I always say that this car is the jack of all trades, but still master of some things, which is really impressive. And there's a reason why people love these things as daily drivers. And I have no regrets owning this vehicle, even though I'm going to lose a lot of money selling this. Because the fact of the matter is, this is what I do, right? I am passionate about sharing ownership experience with you guys, sharing different information from the automotive industry with you guys. And so it's important for me to form opinions out of experience too, not just based on research, right? It's important for me to be able to experience European ownership, even though this might not be, you know, a top European automaker, right? V-dubs are known to have issues, so maybe this wasn't a great place to begin. But it's important to, you know, still experience it and to be able to speak on experience and not just on stereotypes. And I'm sure there's plenty of GTI owners that have had far more positive experiences than I have. And that's awesome for them, because it is genuinely an awesome vehicle, especially for day-to-day driving. It's very efficient as well, on top of all other things I said. So it's just a great package for day-to-day driving. It's important to experience these things, right? Because if we had this car back in 2017 and I was reviewing it, I wouldn't be able to shut up about how great this car is. But there's a difference between getting a car to drive for a week and creating a review for people to watch and owning a vehicle, because things aren't as rosy in the long term, unfortunately. That's kind of, you know, my ownership experience. Again, it's a 2017 that I picked up in 2022 at 44,000 miles, and it's currently January 2023, and I'm selling it at 49,000 miles. So I've owned it about 5,000 miles or so, and this is the longest other vehicle that I had in the past year and a half. Every other car I bought and sold within about 3 months. So it's genuinely a shame, but you know, I'm curious to hear what other people have to say about their ownership experience, but this has been mine, and I thought it would be good to kind of get one last video, I guess technically almost like a first video, to try to give some people perspective, and then people kind of make decisions on their own. So that's it for now, and I'm hoping to not have to have another vehicle for the time being, trying to downsize and have only one vehicle. But if I do get another vehicle, I'll be sure to kind of walk people through the ownership experience that I had with that. So yeah, hope you found this informative, and take care.